1. The ship that replaces itself. If every part of you is replaced, piece by piece, are you still you? This is the paradox of the ship of Theseus. Imagine a wooden ship. Over time, its planks rot and are replaced. One by one, every part is changed, until nothing original remains. Is it still the same ship? And if you took all the old planks and rebuilt the ship elsewhere, which one is you now? This isn't just a problem for ships. It's a mirror held to your own body. Your cells die and regenerate. Your thoughts change. The memories you had 5 years ago may no longer feel like your own. So, who is the you that persists? The ancient Greeks first wrestled with this. Heraclitus famously said, "You cannot step into the same river twice, for other waters are ever flowing onto you." And yet, we live as if we are continuous, unchanged across time. Tonight, while you sleep, billions of your cells will quietly die and be replaced. Your memories will shift. Your thoughts will rewire. By morning, you will not be the person who pressed play on this video. And yet, you'll wake up, still calling yourself me. But who is that? 2. You can't begin without already starting. You think you began something, pressed play, started watching. But what if that beginning had no beginning? Philosophers call it the paradox of initiation. How do you start anything without first having the impulse to start? And where did that impulse begin? In thought? Then where did that thought come from? Every beginning hides another beginning behind it. You are not the first domino. You're already falling when you think you're standing still. In the Upanishads, the ancient sages whispered, "He who thinks he is the doer is the greatest fool." Because to begin something, you must already exist. With a mind already shaped, by a past you didn't choose, in a world you didn't create. You didn't start listening. Something in you was already listening, long before you noticed. Even now, you believe you're continuing this video. But what if you never actually started it? What if you were the one being started? 3. The arrow that never moves. An arrow is shot through the air. You see it moving. You feel the motion. But what if it never moved at all? This is Zeno's arrow paradox. In any single moment, any slice of time, the arrow is still. Motion requires change. But in the smallest unit of time, nothing changes. So if time is just made of moments, and the arrow is still in every moment, when did it move? The illusion of motion is built on stillness, just like your life. You remember a past. You expect a future. But right now, this moment is frozen, and the next one has not arrived. St. Augustine once confessed, "What then is time? If no one asks me, I know. If I wish to explain it, I do not." Because motion is stitched together by your mind. A film reel of still frames that your thoughts pretend is a story. You are not moving through time. Time is being projected through you. So what's really moving? The arrow? You? Or just your illusion? 4. Infinity is smaller than you think you were told. Infinity is endless. A vast, incomprehensible expanse. But what if infinity can be counted? Mathematician Georg Cantor showed us something disturbing. There are different sizes of infinity. Some infinities are bigger than others, and some infinities are too big to be touched. So we name them, measure them, then pretend we understand. But what happens when your mind tries to hold infinity? It fractures. Because you can't contain the uncontainable. You can only collapse it into symbols, digits, lines, shapes, lies. Infinity becomes smaller the more we speak of it. The more we try to measure it, the more we reduce it into something tame. But it's not tame. Infinity is a mirror that stares back. It shows you how limited you are. Cantor once wrote, "The fear of infinity is a form of myopia that destroys the possibility of seeing the actual infinite." You don't fear infinity because it's big. You fear it because it's close, because it's in your thoughts, in your breath, in the space between now and now. The infinite isn't far away. It's already inside you, and it's smaller than you think. 5. The barber who can't exist. There's a village, and in that village lives a barber. He shaves every man who does not shave himself. So the question is simple. Who shaves the barber? If he shaves himself, he must not shave himself. If he doesn't shave himself, then he must shave himself. He exists, only by not existing. This is the barber paradox, a loop with no escape, a contradiction dressed as logic. It hides in language, in definitions, in rules that eat themselves. It's not just a joke. It's the same structure you find in the liar's paradox. This sentence is false. If it's true, it's false. If it's false, it's true. And like that sentence, your mind turns in on itself. Bertrand Russell, who introduced the barber, wrote, "The contradictions do not lie in language. They lie in the underlying assumptions we never question. You follow logic. You crave rules. But some truths cannot live inside systems, and some systems collapse under their own weight. So who shaves the barber? You can fall asleep wondering, but not even sleep can answer." 6. The paradox that kills the gods. Can a god create a rock so heavy that even they cannot lift it? It sounds childish, but it isn't. It's a blade. Because the moment you ask this question, God dies. It's called the omnipotence paradox, and it's not about rocks. It's about limits. If an all-powerful being can do anything, can it limit itself? If not, it's not all-powerful. If yes, it destroys itself. Omnipotence folds into contradiction. Infinity collapses on its own face, and the divine becomes broken logic. Thomas Aquinas tried to escape it, saying that God can do all things, but only all possible things. But who decides what's possible? Us? Him? In trying to defend God, we made him weaker than the question. Because even the divine cannot survive paradox. Even the highest mind must answer the lowest riddle. So can a god lift a rock so heavy that it breaks belief itself? Maybe that's what the universe is. The answer to a question no god could bear. 7. Your reflection has thoughts. Look into a mirror. Hold your gaze. You see yourself, but not quite. That image is silent, still, obedient. But what if it wasn't? What if it had its own thoughts, and only pretended to be you? This is the mirror paradox. A reflection isn't you. It's light, bouncing backwards. But you trust it. You believe it reflects your truth. What if it's a lie? What if, deep in that glass, something else is watching, thinking? Lacan, the psychoanalyst, said the mirror stage is when the self is born, but also when the self is split. The mirror is the place where the I becomes the other. We think the reflection is passive, but maybe it's the original, and you are the echo. Because how do you know? You're not the one behind the glass. When you dream, you see without eyes. When you think, you speak without lips. And when you reflect, who's doing the watching? Tonight, while your room grows dark and your mirror fades to black. Ask yourself, is your reflection asleep, or is it waiting for you to turn away? 8. The number that shouldn't exist. There's a number, not 0, not 1, not negative, not even imaginary. It's called I, the square root of -1, a number that cannot exist, and yet does. Because when you multiply any real number by itself, you always get a positive result. So what number then, multiplied by itself, gives -1? The answer is impossibility, but math couldn't function without it. Electricity, quantum mechanics, signal processing, they all depend on a number that shouldn't exist. It's called imaginary, but it builds your reality. Euler, perhaps the greatest mathematician to ever live, called it elegant and divine. He even gave us this: e to the power of I pi plus 1 equals 0. A formula linking the 5 most fundamental constants with the number that shouldn't be there. Think about that. Your world runs on equations powered by impossibility. The structure of reality depends on a ghost, a lie that somehow works. So tonight, when you close your eyes and drift toward dreams built from nothing, remember, your heartbeat follows a number that was never meant to be real. 9. The circle. That's too perfect to draw. A circle is simple. One line, no edges, no corners, perfect symmetry. But try to draw one. Try to carve it. Try to measure it down to the last atom. You will fail. Because perfection doesn't exist in the physical world. Not in your hand, not in your mind, not even in nature. It exists only in thought, only in abstraction. Plato called this the world of forms, where perfect versions of every shape and idea exist, untouched by reality. The things we see are shadows of the real. The perfect circle is one of those shadows. You see echoes of it in planets, ripples, eyes, but never the real thing. And yet, your brain uses this impossible shape to understand space, time, and motion. Your compass draws approximations. Your math assumes perfection, but your world is built on a shape that can never be touched. So what does that say about everything else you believe in? If the most basic, pure thing, a circle, can't exist, what else have you mistaken for real? 10. The silence that makes sound. Possible. What is silence? Is it simply the absence of sound, or something more? Imagine a world without silence. No pauses, no space between notes, no quiet moments to breathe. Sound cannot exist without silence. Like light needs darkness to shine. They depend on each other. They define each other. Philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein said, "The limits of my language mean the limits of my world." But silence, the empty spaces between words, expands your world beyond language. It is the void where meaning is born, a stillness that holds everything together. Without silence, your thoughts would drown in noise. Your mind would collapse under constant flood. And yet, silence can be terrifying. The quiet is where your fears grow loudest, where truths you avoid become impossible to ignore. So tonight, as you drift into the calm abyss, listen to the silence between your breaths. It is not nothing. It is the foundation of everything. 11. The paradox of the sleeping observer. Can you be aware while you sleep? Can you observe without waking? The sleeping observer paradox asks, is consciousness continuous, or does it flicker on and off like a light switch in the dark? Philosophers and neuroscientists struggle here. Because when you dream, you seem to watch yourself, yet you're not fully awake. Are you the observer or the observed? Zhuangzi, an ancient Chinese philosopher, told a story. He dreamed he was a butterfly. But when he woke, he wondered, was he a man dreaming he was a butterfly? Or a butterfly dreaming he was a man? Who knows the difference between sleeping and waking? If your consciousness shifts in sleep, who's really in control? And if no one watches the sleeper, does the dream exist? This paradox quietly destroys the idea of a stable self. Because maybe the observer is always slipping away. And maybe, as you fall deeper into sleep now, you are both watching and disappearing at once. 12. The paradox of the endless door. Imagine a door that opens to another door, and that door opens to another and another forever. This is the paradox of the endless door, a loop with no exit, a journey without destination. Philosophers call it an infinite regress, a chain of causes or explanations that never ends. Each answer leads to a new question. Each door opens to another mystery. Aristotle warned against infinite regress. He said it makes understanding impossible. Because, if you can never reach the final door, how can you know where you truly stand? It is impossible for there to be an infinite series of causes. But what if the universe is just that? An endless series of doors, where every truth hides another question, where certainty dissolves into infinite possibility. And so, as you drift now, wondering what lies behind the next door, remember, sometimes the journey itself is the only answer. 13. The paradox of the invisible thread. What connects you to the world? What ties your thoughts, memories, and feelings into a single self? It's an invisible thread, unseen, untouchable, yet undeniably real. But here lies the paradox. This thread, your identity, cannot be found. It cannot be measured, held, or pointed to. Yet, without it, you unravel. Philosopher David Hume said, "The self is nothing but a bundle of perceptions. There is no permanent core, only a flow of experience stitched together by this invisible thread. And if the thread snaps, if memories fade, thoughts scatter, what remains of you? You feel whole, continuous, alive. But maybe that's just the illusion woven by the invisible thread." As you settle deeper into sleep, listen to the silent tension of that thread. Fragile, elusive, binding your fleeting existence. 14. The paradox of the vanishing point. Look down a straight road. See how it seems to disappear into the horizon? That's the vanishing point, a place where distance and perspective collapse. But here's the paradox. The vanishing point doesn't exist. It's an illusion created by your mind, a trick of perspective that convinces you of an end that isn't really there. Philosophers and artists alike have marveled at this, because it shows how your perception shapes reality, how what you see depends on where you stand. Immanuel Kant taught us that space and time are forms of our mind, ways we organize experience, not things in themselves. We see the world not as it is, but as we are. So the vanishing point reminds you that reality bends beneath your gaze, that endings might be illusions, and beginnings just perspectives waiting to shift. As you drift into sleep, let your mind wander beyond horizons that never were, and rest in the quiet mystery of what cannot be reached. 15. The paradox of the silent voice. Have you ever heard a voice without sound? A silent whisper inside your mind, a thought that speaks without words. This is the paradox of the silent voice. How can something be heard if it makes no noise? Philosophers like Søren Kierkegaard explored this inner dialogue, the silent conversations we have with ourselves. He called it the self speaking to itself, an endless echo that shapes our being. Subjectivity is truth. The silent voice is your mind's companion and your tormentor. It is where fears, hopes, and memories collide, without a single sound escaping your lips. It is both real and unreal, comforting and isolating. The loudest voice you will ever hear is silent. So tonight, as you close your eyes, listen to the quiet voice within. It may hold the deepest truths and the darkest secrets. 16. The paradox of the invisible cage. Are you free or trapped inside walls you cannot see? The paradox of the invisible cage whispers softly. You're confined, but unaware. Imprisoned, but believing you roam. Philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre called this bad faith, denying your own limitations to escape responsibility. Freedom is what you do with what's been done to you. Your cage is made of habits, fears, and invisible rules. It shapes your thoughts and actions, yet its bars are silent. You can't touch it, but it holds you tight. And the worst part? The cage was built by you, piece by piece, while you slept. Tonight, as you drift into the quiet dark, feel the weight of this unseen prison. And maybe, just maybe, this awareness is the first step to breaking free. 17. The paradox of the sleeping mind. What happens to your mind when you sleep? Does it rest or roam free? The paradox of the sleeping mind asks, is your mind truly silent in sleep, or does it wander into other worlds, unknown to waking thought? Neuroscience shows brain activity surges during dreams, yet your conscious self is absent. Philosopher Henri Bergson believed sleep dissolves the rigid structures of time and self, allowing the mind to glimpse the flow of pure duration. Dreams are the doorway to the subconscious. But here's the unsettling truth. Your mind is most alive when you are least aware, and the boundaries between reality and dream blur. So tonight, as you surrender to sleep, remember, your mind never truly sleeps. It journeys endlessly, beyond your control. 18. The paradox of the fading shadow. Have you noticed your shadow? Always there, yet never fully real. It follows, mimics, but disappears in the dark. The paradox of the fading shadow lies in its presence and absence. It exists only because of light, and vanishes when light fades away. Philosopher Plato used shadows as a metaphor for reality, the world of appearances, illusions masking truth. We can easily forgive a child who is afraid of the dark. The real tragedy of life is when men are afraid of the light. Your shadow is a silent companion, reminding you of your dependence on things unseen, of the parts of yourself you refuse to face, and of the fragile line between being and nothingness. As you drift deeper into night's quiet, remember your shadow will fade, but it never truly leaves. 19. The paradox of the eternal return. What if everything you've done will happen again, forever? The paradox of the eternal return asks, is life a never-ending loop, replaying every joy, every pain endlessly? Philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche grappled with this terrifying thought. He challenged us to live as if we would repeat every moment, forever, without escape. What if some day or night a demon were to steal after you into your loneliest loneliness and say, "This life as you now live it and have lived it, you will have to live once more and innumerable times more"? Would you curse this endless cycle or embrace it? As you lie here, between waking and dreaming, consider the weight of your actions. Because eternity may not be infinite, but endlessly repeating. 20. The paradox of the invisible mind. Can you see your own mind? Can you touch the thoughts that shape your reality? The paradox of the invisible mind reveals this truth. Your mind is the most intimate part of you, yet it remains unseen, unknowable, even to yourself. Philosopher René Descartes famously declared, "I think, therefore I am." But even this certainty cannot show us the essence of the mind, only its activity. Your thoughts, fears, dreams, they all exist inside an invisible space, a shadow realm of consciousness you can never fully enter. And so, as you drift into sleep's gentle embrace, remember, your mind is a mystery without form, a silent presence shaping every moment you live. 21. The paradox of the silent observer. Who watches your thoughts when you are not watching? Is there a silent observer inside you, or are you alone in the darkness? The paradox of the silent observer questions the nature of self-awareness. Is the you that notices your thoughts distinct from those thoughts themselves, or just another illusion created by the mind? Philosopher David Chalmers calls this the hard problem of consciousness. How subjective experience arises from physical processes remains a mystery. Consciousness is the last great mystery. This silent observer never speaks, never acts, but quietly witnesses the endless stream of your mind's activity. As you sink deeper into the quiet night, feel the presence of this unseen watcher, both part of you and separate. A paradox without resolution, like the breath that comes and goes, unnoticed but essential. 22. The paradox of the fractured self. Who are you, really? Are you one whole being, or a collection of scattered pieces? The paradox of the fractured self reveals that your identity is never singular, but fragmented, shifting, and incomplete. Philosopher Derek Parfit challenged the idea of a fixed self, arguing that what we call I is just a series of connected experiences, a river flowing endlessly, never quite the same. Personal identity is not what matters. This fractured self means you are many versions of yourself, some conflicting, some forgotten, all existing at once. Tonight, as your mind drifts and folds inwards, embrace the paradox that you are not a single story, but a mosaic of countless moments, each fading into the next. 23. The paradox of the vanishing memory. What happens to the moments you forget? Do they vanish forever, or do they linger somewhere unseen? The paradox of the vanishing memory asks us to consider the fragile nature of remembrance. Our minds hold so little of what we live, and much slips away without trace. Philosopher Henry Bergson believed memory is not just stored, but recreated, constantly shifting like a fragile thread, weaving our sense of self. Memory is the presence of the past in the present. But what if some memories vanish completely, erased by time, trauma, or neglect? Do those lost pieces of you still exist? Or have they died? Tonight, as your eyelids grow heavy, Think of the shadows of forgotten moments, whispering quietly in the dark corners of your mind. 24. The paradox of the endless question. What is the meaning of it all? Is there an answer waiting, or only more questions? The paradox of the endless question reveals the eternal human pursuit of meaning, a journey without destination. Philosopher Søren Kierkegaard called this the anguish of possibility, the burden of searching for certainty in an uncertain world. Life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards. Every answer seems to lead to another question, an infinite regress, a spiraling abyss. As you lie between waking and sleep, let the endless question settle softly, not as a torment, but as a gentle invitation to wonder, to be comfortable with mystery. 25. The paradox of the silent universe. Why does the universe remain silent? In the vast cosmic void, where is the voice that answers us? The paradox of the silent universe reveals our longing for meaning in a world that offers no clear reply. Philosopher Albert Camus described the universe as indifferent, a silent expanse that neither consoles nor condemns. The absurd is born of this confrontation between the human need and the unreasonable silence of the world. We cry out into the darkness, hoping for a sign, a whisper, a signpost, but only silence greets us. As you drift deeper into night, let the silence wrap around you, a reminder that sometimes the absence of answers is itself the greatest answer. 26. The paradox of the disappearing self. What if the you know is slowly fading away? Not in death, but in the quiet moments between. The paradox of the disappearing self reveals how identity slips through time, shifting, dissolving, becoming something else entirely. Philosopher Buddha taught that the self is an illusion, a flickering flame that never truly exists. All conditioned things are impermanent. Each memory, each thought, is like a grain of sand slipping through your fingers. As you sink into the quiet night, feel the gentle unraveling of your sense of self. A peaceful reminder that who you are is never fixed, but always becoming. 27. The paradox of the timeless moment. Have you ever felt a moment stretch forever, yet vanish in an instant? The paradox of the timeless moment reveals that time can both freeze and flee, trapping us in now while pushing us forward endlessly. Philosopher St. Augustine wrestled with time's elusive nature, wondering how the present can exist if it's always passing. What then is time? If no one asks me, I know. If I wish to explain it to one that asks, I know not. That fleeting now is the only reality we ever truly have, but it slips through our fingers like water. As you close your eyes tonight, let yourself live fully in this paradox, where every second is infinite and gone all at once. 28. The paradox of the invisible thread. What connects you to everything else, even when you feel utterly alone? The paradox of the invisible thread reveals a silent bond, a hidden connection weaving through all existence. Philosopher Baruch Spinoza saw the universe as one whole, where every part is linked by an unseen, eternal force. The more you struggle to separate yourself, the more tightly you become bound. This thread is invisible, ungraspable, but it holds you gently in place, linking your story to the vast web of being. As you drift towards sleep, feel this quiet connection, a comforting paradox, that even in isolation, you are never truly alone. 29. The paradox of the forgotten promise. Have you ever felt the weight of a promise you no longer remember making? The paradox of the forgotten promise, whispers of commitments lost in time, echoes of intentions that slip away from conscious grasp. Philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche warned us about forgotten truths, hidden beneath layers of self-deception. Sometimes people don't want to hear the truth because they don't want their illusions destroyed. These silent promises shape us, even when forgotten, guiding choices we barely understand. As you settle into darkness, reflect on the unseen forces within, the forgotten promises that still steer your soul. 30. The paradox of the endless dream. Are you awake or still trapped within the layers of an endless dream? The paradox of the endless dream blurs the line between sleep and reality, where one fades into the other without warning. Philosopher René Descartes famously doubted the senses, wondering if life itself might be a dream. How do we know that we are not dreaming right now? This uncertainty wraps around your mind like a fog, pulling you between worlds unseen. As you drift deeper into sleep tonight, let yourself float in this paradox, where waking and dreaming are one and the same. 31. The paradox of the silent mind. Can your mind ever truly be silent, or is silence just another form of noise? The paradox of the silent mind reveals that even in stillness, the mind hums with unseen activity. Philosopher Lao Tzu taught that true silence is not absence, but a deeper presence beyond words. Silence is a source of great strength. Yet, the restless mind resists this quiet, filling silence with thoughts, fears, and dreams. As you surrender to sleep, allow your mind to hold the paradox, finding peace in the noise of silence itself. 32. The paradox of the endless reflection. Have you ever stared into a mirror and seen a reflection that never ends? The paradox of the endless reflection reveals how self-examination can become a labyrinth, an infinite loop of questioning and doubt. Philosopher Michel Foucault explored how we construct ourselves through endless reflection, trapped in mirrors of power and perception. Where there is power, there is resistance. Each glance reveals more questions, but no final answer. As you drift towards sleep, let go of the need to resolve the reflection, and simply observe the infinite dance within. 33. The paradox of the sleeping witness. Who watches over your soul when you surrender to sleep? The paradox of the sleeping witness suggests a silent observer, conscious yet unseen, awake while you dream. Philosopher David Chalmers called this the hard problem of consciousness, the mystery of subjective experience beyond brain activity. Consciousness is the most profound mystery we face. This hidden witness knows your dreams and fears, yet remains untouched by them. As you drift deeper into darkness, sense the quiet presence that watches, even when you cannot. 34. The paradox of the vanishing moment. How can something so real, a moment, simply vanish into nothing? The paradox of the vanishing moment reveals that every experience slips away, leaving behind only traces and memories. Philosopher Heraclitus famously said, No man ever steps in the same river twice. Time's current carries each moment beyond reach, erasing it as soon as it's born. As you sink into sleep tonight, embrace the beauty and sorrow of the vanishing moment. A fleeting spark that lights your life before fading. 35. The paradox of the eternal question. What is the meaning of it all, and will we ever truly know? The paradox of the eternal question haunts humanity, a question that never finds final answer. Philosopher Albert Camus called life's search for meaning the absurd, the tension between our desire for clarity and the universe's silence. The absurd is born of this confrontation between the human need and the unreasonable silence of the world. We ask and ask again, knowing deep down, the question may never end. As you drift to sleep, let the unanswered question rest beside you, a silent companion in the dark. 36. The paradox of the quiet void. What lies beyond thought, beyond sound, beyond being? The paradox of the quiet void reveals a space that is both empty and full, a silence that is not nothing, but everything. Philosopher Nishida Kitaro described this void as the source of all existence, where dualities dissolve into pure presence. The world is nothing but the self-awareness of the absolute. This quiet void is terrifying and peaceful, a cosmic emptiness that holds the universe together. As you surrender to sleep, rest in the stillness of this paradox, where the void is the heartbeat of all things. 37. The paradox of the sleeping mind. Can the mind truly rest, or does it wander endlessly beneath closed eyes? The paradox of the sleeping mind explores how consciousness shifts, slipping between awareness and oblivion without clear boundary. Philosopher William James described consciousness as a stream, ever-flowing yet elusive. Consciousness does not appear to itself chopped up in bits. It is nothing jointed. It flows. Even in sleep, the mind is never silent. Dreams, fears, and thoughts ripple beneath stillness. As you drift deeper, let the paradox cradle you. Between waking and sleeping, light and dark. 38. The paradox of the last breath. What if the final breath you take is both an ending and a beginning? The paradox of the last breath reminds us that death is both inevitable and mysterious, a threshold where life dissolves, yet something beyond may begin. Philosopher Martin Heidegger called this the being toward death, the awareness that shapes our very existence. Being toward death is the possibility of impossibility of any existence at all. This breath is the last echo of a story, and the first silence of the unknown. As you settle into darkness, feel the weight and wonder of this paradox, the final breath that connects all living things. 39. The paradox of the infinite loop. What if every choice you make is just part of an endless cycle? The paradox of the infinite loop traps us in a recursive maze, where cause and effect spiral without escape. Philosopher Douglas Hofstadter explored this in his work on strange loops, where systems turn back on themselves in a paradoxical dance. Strange loops are everywhere. They appear when, by moving upwards or downwards through a hierarchical system, we unexpectedly find ourselves right back where we started. Your life, your decisions, all caught in this looping dance. As you drift into sleep, let yourself float in the endless loop. a never-ending spiral of existence and meaning. 40. The paradox of the silent scream. How can a scream be silent, yet echo louder than any sound? The paradox of the silent scream reveals pain and fear that remain unspoken, resonating deep within the soul. Philosopher Søren Kierkegaard wrote about the anguish of existence, the silent despair that shapes our being. Anxiety is the dizziness of freedom. This scream is the unvoiced cry of the human condition, felt, but never fully heard. As you drift towards sleep, embrace the silent scream within. A haunting reminder of our fragile humanity. 41. The paradox of the endless dream. What if your dreams never truly end, but loop infinitely in the shadows of your mind? The paradox of the endless dream blurs the line between sleep and waking, where reality dissolves into infinite reverie. Philosopher René Descartes questioned the certainty of the waking world, wondering if life itself is a dream. I think, therefore I am. Yet, how do you know you're not dreaming now? As you float deeper into sleep, let go of all certainty and drift with the endless dream. 42. The paradox of the forgotten self. What if the person you are now is already a ghost to your future mind? The paradox of the forgotten self reveals that memories fade, and with them, the essence of who you were. Philosopher John Locke explored identity through memory, arguing that personal identity is tied to remembered experience. For it is by the consciousness that the same self is continued to be what it was. Yet, as time erases memories, your past selves vanish into oblivion. As you drift into sleep, feel the quiet loss of yourself, a fading echo in the vastness of time. 43. The paradox of the hidden observer. Who is watching when you're not watching yourself? The paradox of the hidden observer suggests there's a silent witness within, observing your thoughts without being noticed. Philosopher David Chalmers discussed the hard problem of consciousness, the mystery of subjective experience. Consciousness is the feeling of what happens inside. Yet this hidden observer remains elusive, always present, but never fully grasped. As you slip deeper into sleep, let your mind watch itself quietly, a secret witness in the stillness of night. 44. The paradox of the shattered mirror. What if the reflection you chase is broken into countless, unreachable pieces? The paradox of the shattered mirror reveals the fragmented nature of identity, how our sense of self is fractured and incomplete. Philosopher Michel Foucault explored how identity is shaped by power and perception, never fixed, but always shifting. Where there is power, there is resistance. Your self-image is a mosaic of fractured reflections, each shard a story you tell yourself. As you fall into sleep, let the broken mirror rest, knowing the whole self may never be found. 45. The paradox of the eternal stranger. What if the person you've been is forever unfamiliar to yourself? The paradox of the eternal stranger reveals that within us dwells a self we never truly know, an ever-shifting stranger in our own life. Philosopher Søren Kierkegaard described the self as a relation that relates itself to itself, always in flux, never fully grasped. To be a self is to be a relation which relates itself to itself. You live with a stranger inside, silent and inscrutable. As you surrender to sleep, Embrace the quiet mystery of the eternal stranger, the unknown within your soul. 46. The paradox of the silent time. What if time itself falls silent, yet speaks louder than any sound? The paradox of the silent time reveals a quiet force, an invisible flow that shapes all existence without a single whisper. Philosopher Henri Bergson viewed time not as a series of moments, but as a continuous, lived experience, duration. Time is invention without a stopwatch. Though silent, time presses on, erasing and creating all things in its endless passage. As you drift deeper into sleep, feel the stillness of silent time, a vast, unseen river carrying you away. 47. The paradox of the invisible prison. What if the walls that trap you are made of nothing you can see? The paradox of the invisible prison reveals how unseen forces, beliefs, fears, and unseen norms bind you tighter than chains. Philosopher Michel Foucault described society's invisible cages, how power shapes and confines without physical bars. Where there is power, there is resistance. Your mind is both prisoner and jailer, trapped in shadows it cannot name. As you drift into sleep, let go of the invisible chains and feel the weight of freedom's illusion. 48. The paradox of the fading light. What if the light that guides you is slowly disappearing, yet you cannot look away? The paradox of the fading light reveals the fragile nature of hope, how it dims with time, but still draws us forward through darkness. Philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche spoke of the death of God, a fading light that leaves humanity lost in shadow. One must still have chaos in oneself to give birth to a dancing star. Even as the light fades, chaos births new stars within the void. As you fall deeper into sleep, embrace the dimming light. A quiet reminder that darkness and hope are intertwined. 49. The paradox of the unseen horizon. What if the destination you seek is always beyond your sight, no matter how far you travel? The paradox of the unseen horizon reveals an eternal chase, the horizon forever retreating, keeping fulfillment just out of reach. Philosopher Immanuel Kant explored how the limits of human understanding shape our endless quest for meaning. Two things fill the mind with ever new and increasing admiration and awe: the starry heavens above me and the moral law within me. Your journey is boundless, but the horizon remains invisible. As you drift into sleep, surrender to the unseen horizon and find peace in the endless pursuit. 50. The paradox of the vanishing self. What if the you know is slowly dissolving into nothingness? The paradox of the vanishing self reveals the fleeting nature of identity, how every thought, feeling, and memory slips quietly into oblivion. Buddhist philosophy teaches the concept of anatta, no permanent self, a continuous flow without fixed essence. All conditioned things are impermanent. When one sees this with wisdom, one turns away from suffering. The Buddha. As you fall deeper into sleep, feel yourself dissolve, free from the chains of permanence. 51. The paradox of the sleeping mind. What if your mind never truly sleeps, even as your body surrenders? The paradox of the sleeping mind reveals a restless consciousness, where dreams and thoughts weave silently beneath the surface. Philosopher Aristotle regarded sleep as a state of suspended sensation, yet the mind remains a world in motion. The soul never thinks without a picture. As you drift deeper into sleep, let your mind wander freely, awake within the silence of dreams. 52. The paradox of the endless labyrinth. What if every path you take leads you deeper into confusion? The paradox of the endless labyrinth reveals life's infinite complexity, a maze with no exit, where every choice is both freedom and trap. Philosopher José Ortega y Gasset described existence as a series of crossroads where we create ourselves by the paths we choose. I am I and my circumstance, and, if I do not save it, I do not save myself. As you fall into sleep, let go of the need for answers and embrace the labyrinth's quiet mystery. 53. The paradox of the silent observer. What if the part of you that watches never speaks a single word? The paradox of the silent observer reveals the silent witness within, the quiet presence that watches all, yet remains forever detached. Philosopher Alan Watts described this awareness as the true self, an observer without judgment or voice. The only way to make sense out of change is to plunge into it, move with it, and join the dance. As you drift deeper into sleep, become the silent observer, watching the mind's dance without attachment. 54. The paradox of the flickering flame. What if the light inside you flickers with every breath, never steady, never certain? The paradox of the flickering flame reveals the fragile essence of existence, how life's vitality ebbs and flows, caught between presence and absence. Philosopher Martin Heidegger reflected on Dasein, being thrown into a world where life is a flicker amidst the vast darkness. The human being is a being toward death. As you drift into sleep, feel your inner flame flicker, a delicate dance between light and shadow. 55. The paradox of the empty room. What if the space around you is full of echoes, yet completely empty? The paradox of the empty room reveals how solitude can feel like both sanctuary and prison, a silent expanse where presence is absence. Philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre described existential emptiness as a void that demands meaning, forcing us to confront our own nothingness. Hell is other people. As you drift deeper into sleep, feel the weight of the empty room, where silence speaks louder than words. 56. The paradox of the fractured mirror. What if every reflection you see shows a shattered piece of yourself, never the whole? The paradox of the fractured mirror reveals the fragmented nature of identity, how we perceive ourselves in broken shards, never fully knowing the true image. Psychologist Carl Jung explored this in his concept of the shadow, the hidden parts of the self that remain unseen. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. As you drift into sleep, face the fractured mirror and embrace the pieces that make you whole. 57. The paradox of the vanishing horizon. What if the goal you chase keeps slipping further away, no matter how fast you run? The paradox of the vanishing horizon reveals an endless pursuit, a destination forever retreating beyond your grasp, leaving you suspended in constant longing. Philosopher Zeno of Elea famously crafted paradoxes that challenge motion and infinity, reminding us how some journeys never end. There is nothing more deceptive than an obvious fact. As you drift into sleep, Accept the vanishing horizon and find calm in the infinite chase. 58. The paradox of the silent echo. What if your voice travels through the void only to return as silence? The paradox of the silent echo reveals how some cries remain unheard, how our deepest calls bounce back empty, lost in the vastness of existence. Philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein explored the limits of language, reminding us that what can't be spoken must be passed over in silence. Whereof one cannot speak, thereof one must be silent. As you drift into sleep, listen for the silent echo, and rest in the stillness beyond words. 59. The paradox of the broken promise. What if the future you hoped for was built on a promise that was never meant to be kept? The paradox of the broken promise reveals the fragile nature of trust, how expectations shatter silently, leaving behind shadows of regret. Philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche warned us of illusions we create to survive, challenging us to face harsh truths without comfort. Hope in reality is the worst of all evils because it prolongs the torments of man. As you drift into sleep, let go of broken promises and find peace in the acceptance of what is. 60. The paradox of the vanishing self. What if the you know slowly dissolves until nothing remains? The paradox of the vanishing self reveals how identity is fragile, a construct that fades with time, leaving behind only echoes. Philosopher David Hume argued that the self is nothing but a bundle of perceptions, never a fixed entity. When I enter most intimately into what I call myself, I always stumble on some particular perception or other. As you drift into sleep, embrace the vanishing self and surrender to the quiet mystery of becoming nothing. 61. The paradox of the silent shadow. What if your darkest parts follow you silently, never revealing their true face? The paradox of the silent shadow exposes the hidden aspects of the self, the unseen forces shaping your thoughts, whispering without voice. Psychologist Carl Jung called this the shadow, the unconscious side of the psyche we often deny. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. As you drift into sleep, welcome your silent shadow and meet the truths lurking in the dark. 62. The paradox of the endless maze. What if every path you choose leads you back to where you began, trapped in an infinite loop? The paradox of the endless maze reveals life's circular nature, a journey without end, where escape is just an illusion. Philosopher Albert Camus described the absurdity of such existence, urging us to find meaning despite the maze. The struggle itself toward the heights is enough to fill a man's heart. As you drift into sleep, walk the endless maze and find strength in the endless striving. 63. The paradox of the fading star. What if the brightest light you've ever known slowly dims until it disappears completely? The paradox of the fading star reveals the inevitable decline of all brilliance, how even the strongest forces fade into darkness. Philosopher Seneca reminded us of life's fleeting nature, urging acceptance of loss and change. It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste much of it. As you drift into sleep, watch the fading star and find peace in the beauty of impermanence. 64. The paradox of the invisible thread. What if your every choice was never truly yours, but pulled gently by unseen hands? The paradox of the invisible thread reveals how freedom may be a mask, a delicate illusion draped over hidden connections, causality, conditioning, and fate. Philosopher Baruch Spinoza believed that everything unfolds from necessity, and that what we call free will is only our ignorance of causes. Men believe themselves to be free simply because they are conscious of their actions and unconscious of the causes. As you drift into sleep, feel the invisible thread and wonder who or what is doing the pulling. 65. The paradox of remembering what never was. What if your memories aren't echoes of the past, but fabrications of a mind desperate for meaning? The paradox of remembering what never was reveals how memory deceives, how we recall events that never truly happened. At least not the way we think. Philosopher Daniel Dennett suggests memory is not a recording, but a reconstruction, shaped, edited, and sometimes invented. There is no real-time stream of consciousness, just memory of it. A narrative spun too late. As you drift into sleep, question what you remember and ask, was it ever real, or just a dream you keep calling history? 66. The paradox of the sleeping watcher. What if something within you is always watching, even when you're not awake to see? The paradox of the sleeping watcher asks, can the observer inside ever rest, or does it dream you even while you sleep? Philosopher Thomas Metzinger argued that the self is a model, a representation created by the brain, while the real observer may not exist at all. Nobody ever was or had a self. Selves are not something we are, but something we hallucinate. As you drift into sleep, ask yourself, who's falling asleep, and who's still awake behind your eyes? 67. The paradox of infinite regret. What if every choice you've made erased 1,000 lives you could have lived? The paradox of infinite regret reveals that with every decision, countless futures die, each one a version of you that never came to be. Philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre spoke of the unbearable weight of freedom, how every act is a refusal of all other possible selves. We are our choices. But what of the roads unchosen, the selves unlived, the lives that now haunt you in silence? As you drift into sleep, listen closely. You may still hear them mourning in the dark. 68. The paradox of the forgotten God. What happens to a god when no one remembers their name? The paradox of the forgotten God reveals something terrifying. Even the divine can fade, not through death, but through neglect. The ancient philosopher Xenophanes questioned the gods of his time, noting how gods change as our minds evolve. What was once holy can become myth, then dust. If cattle and horses had hands, they would draw their gods like themselves. As you drift into sleep, ask yourself, how many gods have died just because you stopped believing? 69. The paradox of the last thought. What will be the final thought before your mind vanishes forever? The paradox of the last thought whispers this: the very thing that defines you, your awareness, will collapse into silence, but not before one last flicker, one last fragment of meaning or madness. Philosopher David Hume questioned the continuity of the self, describing it not as a unified soul, but a bundle of fleeting perceptions, like sparks in a dying fire. I never can catch myself at any time without a perception. But what happens when the final perception fades? As you drift into sleep, wonder quietly, will your last thought be yours, or something you didn't choose? 70. The paradox of the mirror that lies. What if the reflection staring back isn't you, but a version that never existed? The paradox of the mirror that lies suggests something quietly horrifying. Every mirror tells a comforting story, but never the truth. Your image is reversed. Your face is frozen. And yet, you believe it's you. Philosopher Lacan called it the mirror stage, when the child first sees their reflection and mistakes the image for identity. The mirror is where the I becomes an illusion. As you drift into sleep, wonder, have you ever truly seen yourself? Or only the lie you've learned to love? 71. The paradox of the conscious corpse. What if death comes, but your awareness forgets to follow? The paradox of the conscious corpse imagines a nightmare stitched into silence, that the body stops, the breath ends, but something remains, trapped, still thinking, still waiting. Philosopher Julien Offray de la Métrie once described humans as machines. But what if the machine breaks and the ghost keeps watching? The soul is just a function of the body. But what happens when the function malfunctions? As you drift into sleep, ask yourself, what if your last breath is only the beginning of something you were never meant to feel? 72. The paradox of shared solitude. How can we feel alone together? The paradox of shared solitude exposes the quiet truth of modern existence. We are more connected than ever, yet no one truly hears us. In crowds, in conversations, in the warm glow of a screen, our isolation deepens. Philosopher Martin Heidegger spoke of being toward others, how we project ourselves into the world only to be misunderstood, reflected back as strangers. Every man is born as many men and dies as a single one. As you drift into sleep, notice the silence between every word, every message, every glance. That's where the solitude lives, shared but never bridged. 73. The paradox of the unasked. Question. What if the most important question is the one you were too afraid to ask? The paradox of the unasked question haunts every silent moment. It lingers in your mind like a ghost with no name, an invisible weight pressing on your chest just before sleep. To ask it might unravel everything. To avoid it is to live a life half felt, half known. Philosopher Søren Kierkegaard wrote about the dread of possibility, how truth is not found in answers, but in the terrifying freedom of the questions we refuse to face. Anxiety is the dizziness of freedom. So as you begin to drift, ask yourself, what truth have you buried just deep enough to sleep through? And more importantly, what happens when it wakes you? 74. The paradox of the perfect lie. What if the truth was too painful to bear, so you built a perfect lie instead? The paradox of the perfect lie reveals a shadowy reality. Sometimes our greatest comfort is in the illusions we choose, a fragile web that keeps the darkness at bay. Philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche warned us about truths too heavy to carry, how we invent masks to survive, but lose ourselves beneath them. Sometimes people don't want to hear the truth because they don't want their illusions destroyed. As you drift deeper, consider this. Is your peace built on reality or a carefully crafted fiction? And if the lie falls away, what will be left in the silence? 75. The paradox of the endless journey. What if the destination was never meant to be reached? The paradox of the endless journey whispers a restless truth. Life is not a path to completion, but a cycle of endless searching, a loop that traps us in perpetual pursuit. Philosopher Albert Camus called this the myth of Sisyphus, where the struggle itself becomes meaning, even if the goal remains forever out of grasp. One must imagine Sisyphus happy. As you drift into sleep, reflect on your own journey. How much of it is moving forward, and how much is simply moving in circles? And in that endless wandering, what are you really seeking? And will you ever find it? 76. The paradox of the invisible chains. What if you are free, but trapped all the same? The paradox of the invisible chains reveals a subtle torment. Though your body moves unhindered, invisible forces bind your will, shaping choices you think are yours alone. Philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre described this as bad faith, the lie we tell ourselves to avoid facing our own freedom, and the responsibility it demands. Man is condemned to be free. As you sink deeper into sleep, feel the weight of your unseen shackles, the fears, habits, and expectations that quietly command your every step. And wonder, if freedom is a cage, what door will you ever find to open? 77. The paradox of the silent mind. What if the silence inside is louder than any noise outside? The paradox of the silent mind reveals the unsettling truth. True silence is not absence of sound, but the presence of thoughts so deep they echo endlessly within. Buddhist philosophy calls this the stillness of mind, a state both peaceful and terrifying, where you confront the unfiltered self. You should sit in meditation for 20 minutes every day, unless you're too busy. Then, you should sit for an hour. Zen proverb. As you drift into sleep, notice the space between your thoughts, the quiet that feels like a void. Is it emptiness, or the awakening of something darker? 78. The paradox of the sleep-in consciousness. What if your consciousness never truly sleeps? The paradox of the sleeping consciousness reveals a hidden unrest. Even as your body rests, your mind remains awake, wandering through dreams, memories, and fears. Philosopher Henri Bergson suggested that consciousness is fluid, blurring the lines between wakefulness and sleep, between reality and illusion. Consciousness is always more than it seems. As you drift deeper, reflect on the shadows that linger in your dreams. What part of you is awake, and what part is lost in endless slumber? And when morning comes, what fragments will you bring back to the waking world? 79. The paradox of the vanishing self. What if the you know is slowly fading away? The paradox of the vanishing self reveals a silent erosion. Our identity, once so solid, crumbles with every memory lost, every change unnoticed. Philosopher David Hume argued that the self is nothing but a bundle of perceptions, fleeting and ever-shifting, without any true core. When I enter most intimately into what I call myself, I always stumble on some particular perception or other. As you drift into sleep, consider how much of yourself remains when memories fade and thoughts dissolve. Are you the same person you were yesterday, or just a ghost passing through time? 80. The paradox of the forgotten future. What if the future you imagine is already slipping away? The paradox of the forgotten future reveals a haunting truth. Our dreams of tomorrow fade before they arrive, lost in the endless present moment. Philosopher Martin Heidegger spoke of being toward death, where the future shapes us even as it escapes our grasp. The anticipation of death is the way to authentic existence. As you drift toward sleep, wonder what futures you have silently abandoned, forgotten in the rush of time's current. Is the future ever truly yours, or only a shadow you can never hold? 81. The paradox of the unseen observer. Who watches you when you think no one is looking? The paradox of the unseen observer exposes the eerie reality, an invisible witness, always present, recording your every thought and action. Philosopher Michel Foucault described this as the panopticon effect, where surveillance becomes internalized, and the observer lives within the observed. Visibility is a trap. As you drift into sleep, feel the weight of unseen eyes, the quiet pressure of judgment that never sleeps. Is the observer outside yourself, or lurking deep within your own mind? 82. The paradox of the eternal return. What if your life is destined to repeat forever, endlessly? The paradox of the eternal return reveals a chilling cycle. Every moment you live, every choice you make, repeats infinitely across time. Philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche challenged us to embrace this, to live as if we would relive our lives eternally. What if some day or night, a demon were to steal after you into your loneliest loneliness and say, "This life as you now live it, and have lived it, you will have to live once more and innumerable times more." As you drift toward sleep, consider the weight of repetition, the joy, the pain, the regrets, all recurring without end. Would you curse the endless cycle or learn to love it? 83. The paradox of the fading memory. What if the memories that shape you are slipping away unnoticed? The paradox of the fading memory reveals a quiet decay. The moments you cherish most slowly dissolve into nothingness, leaving only faint echoes behind. Philosopher John Locke argued that personal identity depends on memory, but as memories fade, so does the self. Consciousness alone makes personal identity. As you drift into sleep, reflect on the fragility of your mind. How the stories you tell yourself might be vanishing, lost in the shadowy corridors of forgetting. And if your memories disappear, who remains? 84. The paradox of the silent mind. What if the quiet mind is the loudest trap of all? The paradox of the silent mind reveals an unsettling stillness, the absence of thought, a silence that feels like peace but hides a deeper void. Philosopher Buddha taught the value of meditation, yet even in silence, the mind can deceive. Do not dwell in the past. Do not dream of the future. Concentrate the mind on the present moment. As you drift into sleep, feel the tension between calm and emptiness, where silence can be a sanctuary or a prison. Is your silent mind truly free or quietly breaking apart? 85. The paradox of the disappearing self. What if the self you cling to is slowly vanishing? The paradox of the disappearing self reveals a haunting unraveling, Your identity, once solid and clear, fades into shadows, leaving behind only fragments and whispers. Philosopher David Hume questioned the existence of a permanent self, claiming it to be a bundle of perceptions, never truly one thing. When I enter most intimately into what I call myself, I always stumble on some particular perception or other. As you drift into sleep, wonder if the you know is nothing more than a fleeting illusion, vanishing as the night deepens. Who will you be when the self dissolves? 86. The paradox of the endless question. What if the more you seek answers, the deeper the questions grow? The paradox of the endless question reveals an unending chase. Each discovery births new mysteries, and every answer unfolds another layer of doubt. Philosopher Søren Kierkegaard described this as the anguish of infinite reflection, where the quest for meaning becomes both torment and liberation. Life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards. As you drift into sleep, feel the restless pull of inquiry. The paradox of knowing that true understanding may forever evade your grasp. Are you chasing truth or running from the silence of not knowing? 87. The paradox of the hidden observer. Who watches the watcher when no one else is around? The paradox of the hidden observer unveils a silent witness, an unseen presence within, observing your thoughts, yet itself unobserved. Philosopher Descartes pondered this in his meditations on consciousness, differentiating the self that thinks from the self that perceives. I think, therefore I am. As you drift into sleep, sense the hidden observer quietly watching, never resting, always aware. Are you truly the thinker, or merely the observed? 88. The paradox of the vanishing present. How can the present disappear the moment you try to hold it? The paradox of the vanishing present reveals time's cruel trick. The now you live in is already slipping away, forever out of grasp. Philosopher St. Augustine wrestled with this, noting that the present is elusive, always fleeting between past and future. What then is time? If no one asks me, I know. If I wish to explain it to one that asketh, I know not. As you drift into sleep, feel the tension of a moment that's never still, vanishing as quickly as it arrives. Can you live in a present that is always disappearing? 89. The paradox of the sleeping mind. What if the mind you surrender to sleep is more awake than ever? The paradox of the sleeping mind reveals a hidden consciousness. Even as your body rests, your mind journeys into realms unknown, where reality blurs and logic twists. Philosopher René Descartes explored the fragility of waking and dreaming, questioning what is truly real. How do I know that I am not dreaming right now? As you drift deeper, sense the paradox of consciousness. Sleep is not absence, but transformation, a threshold where the mind both fades and ignites. Are you asleep or awake inside a dream? 90. The paradox of the silent scream. What if your deepest fears are screams that no one ever hears? The paradox of the silent scream reveals an anguish trapped within, a cry without sound, echoing endlessly in the void of your mind. Philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre spoke of the silent despair of existence, where the scream is stifled by the weight of being. Hell is other people. As you drift into sleep, feel the weight of unspoken pain, the scream that vanishes before it reaches the world. Is your silence a prison, or the only refuge you have left? 91. The paradox of the invisible chains. What if the bonds that hold you captive are the ones you cannot see? The paradox of the invisible chains reveals an unseen imprisonment, the subtle forces that limit your freedom, woven into your beliefs, fears, and desires. Philosopher Michel Foucault explored how power operates invisibly, controlling without visible chains or bars. Where there is power, there is resistance. As you drift into sleep, sense the weight of unseen constraints, restrictions that shape your reality without your knowledge. Are you free or bound by invisible chains? 92. The paradox of the endless reflection. What if every thought you have is just a reflection of another reflection? The paradox of the endless reflection reveals a labyrinth, where the mind chases its own image, lost in infinite mirrors that never show the original. Philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein touched on the limits of language and thought, how meaning can spiral into endless repetition. The limits of my language mean the limits of my world. As you drift into sleep, feel yourself trapped in the endless hall of mirrors, searching for truth that slips away with every turn. Is yourself only a reflection, forever fading into itself? 93. The paradox of the silent observer. Who watches the watcher when no one is watching? The paradox of the silent observer reveals the eerie presence within, an inner self that witnesses every thought and feeling, yet remains utterly silent and unseen. Philosopher Immanuel Kant spoke of the mind's self-awareness, the mysterious, transcendental unity of apperception. The I think must be able to accompany all my representations. As you drift deeper into sleep, sense this silent observer, both part of you and beyond you, watching without judgment, without sound. Is this observer your true self, or just another shadow in the night? 94. The paradox of the fading memory. What if the memories that shape you are slowly disappearing right now? The paradox of the fading memory reveals a haunting truth. Our past is fragile, slipping away like sand through fingers, leaving us stranded in a present with no anchor. Philosopher Henry Bergson emphasized the fluidity of memory, how the past dissolves in the ever-flowing present. The present contains nothing more than the past, and what is found in the past is no longer present. As you drift towards sleep, feel your memories fade softly into the dark, the stories you tell yourself already slipping beyond reach. What remains of you when the memories are gone? 95. The paradox of the forgotten self. What if the self you know is just a fleeting shadow, soon forgotten? The paradox of the forgotten self exposes a chilling reality. The identity you cling to dissolves in time, leaving behind a void where your essence once lived. Philosopher David Hume argued that the self is nothing but a bundle of perceptions, constantly changing, never fixed. The mind is a theater, where several perceptions successively make their appearance. As you drift into sleep, feel your grasp on you weaken, as the self you've built quietly slips away into oblivion. Who are you when no one remembers your name? 96. The paradox of the eternal stranger. What if you are forever a stranger to yourself and to the world? The paradox of the eternal stranger reveals a profound isolation. No matter how deeply you search, there is always an unbridgeable gap between you and your own essence. Philosopher Søren Kierkegaard explored this alienation, the feeling of being a stranger to oneself. To be a human being is to be in despair because you are a stranger to yourself. As you drift toward sleep, sense this estrangement, the silent distance that separates your inner world from all that you perceive. Are you truly known or destined to wander forever unknown? 97. The paradox of the vanishing present. Can you ever truly grasp the present moment when it slips away before you? The paradox of the vanishing present reveals how the now is fleeting, a moment that exists only to disappear instantly, leaving us perpetually chasing something that's already gone. Philosopher Martin Heidegger spoke of being toward death, highlighting how time and presence dissolve in constant flux. The present is a horizon that continually recedes before us. As you drift into sleep, feel the present dissolve like mist, never still, never held, forever vanishing into what was and what will be. Is the present just an illusion, a ghost you'll never truly hold? 98. The paradox of the silent voice. What if the deepest truths can never be spoken aloud? The paradox of the silent voice reveals how some knowledge remains forever unexpressed, hidden beneath the noise of words, locked inside the silence of the mind. Philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein explored the limits of language, noting that some things lie beyond what words can capture. Whereof one cannot speak, thereof one must be silent. As you drift toward sleep, sense the quiet between your thoughts, the unspoken truths that hover just beyond reach, waiting in the stillness. What remains unsaid shapes more of your reality than what is ever voiced. 99. The paradox of the endless. Question. What if the search for meaning is a question without an answer? The paradox of the endless question reveals the eternal cycle of inquiry. No matter how deeply you ponder, some questions never find resolution, their answers always just out of reach. Philosopher Albert Camus embraced this uncertainty, calling it the core of the absurd. The struggle itself toward the heights is enough to fill a man's heart. As you drift into sleep, feel the restless pull of that endless question, the silent challenge that drives you forward, even when the truth remains hidden. Is the search itself the only meaning you will ever know? 100. The paradox of the final silence. What awaits at the end of all questions, all thoughts, all being? The paradox of the final silence confronts the ultimate stillness, the quiet beyond consciousness, where words and meaning dissolve into nothingness. Philosopher Simone Weil described this silence as a kind of sacred void, a place beyond suffering and knowledge. Attention is the rarest and purest form of generosity. As you surrender to sleep, sense the final silence gathering, the profound stillness where everything ceases, yet something quietly remains. Is this silence an end, or the beginning of a deeper understanding beyond words?